Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. On the event of the 8th meet of Sikh Women Book Club, it's a pleasure to welcome you all on behalf of Mata Tripta Gurukar in Nath Pragas, USA. Today we have 3 talks lined up for this session. The first talk is going to be delivered by Harleen Kaur on Rabindranath Tagore's Creative Unity. The second talk will be delivered by Jaswin Sidhu on the book Tao of Physics, composed by Fridtjof Capra. And the last presentation will be on the Analects, works of Confucius. To give a brief introduction about Harleen Kaur, Harleen is an avid community organizer, educator, and scholar. Her passion project is in utilizing Sikhis' notions of humanity as a driver for higher community consciousness, rooted in an intersectional anti-oppression framework. Much of Harleen's inspiration, voice, and vision was cultivated during her year as a Bonderman Fellow when she backpacked solo through 15 countries to better develop a global framework for liberation and sovereignty. We're very pleased to have Harleen as the first speaker today, wherein she's going to be throwing light on Rabindranath Tagore's Creative Unity. As we all know, Rabindranath Tagore is very admirably referred to as the Bard of Bengal. He is an intellectual who is known for his compositions, poetry, playwrights, social reforms, philosophies, and paintings, and he's had a considerable impact on Bengali literature. Let's sit tight and hear what Harleen has to inform us today. Harleen?
Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. So I'll start by sharing sort of an anecdotal experience I had last night, actually just after finishing the book. I was very excited to engage with Tagore because for some reason I have very vivid memories from, I think, middle school of my mom telling me how much she enjoyed his writings growing up in Punjab. And growing up here, I never had the chance to engage with his work, so it has been a really profound experience that I hope to share with you in some words. All Rise, a 12-movement composition by renowned jazz artist Wynton Marsalis, was commissioned by the New York Philharmonic Orchestra and first premiered in December 1999 at Lincoln Center. Notes by composer Marsalis in the original program book stated, quote, "The 20th century has been the century of communication. The 21st century will be the century of integration," end quote. Watching the Michigan premiere of All Rise last night, I sat in one of the final rows of Hill Auditorium, which seats 3,500 people. Between the cadences of jazz, samba, folk, and more, I watched knees bounce, heads sway, and bodies move to the sounds that flowed over us with perfect acoustic quality. Attending the show after reading Creative Unity felt like watching the live musical production of a book. As I was absorbed in Marsalis's rendering of what it means to experience true love, that of a parent, a child, a partner, even a human, I found myself visually captivated by the bodies around me who were resonating with this auditory experience in the same way. The backs of heads I would never know, meet, or engage with, but with whom I was having the shared experience, perhaps one of creative unity. I could not help but recall another time where I sat in the same nosebleed student discount section of Hill Auditorium, that time to listen to a star of classical music, Yo-Yo Ma, and his Silk Road Ensemble. A similar masterpiece that brought together sounds and rhythm in a way then reminiscent of all that the Silk Road witnessed in terms of textiles, spices, and other goods. A sophomore in undergrad then, I remember being caught up in the wild mystery of all that the ensemble painted before us. colorful stories of new worlds, people, and meaning. As the final fantastical movement came to an end, an explosion of sound, it was still simultaneously possible to hear the complete silence of breath, each person holding their lungs for the final release of creative sound. I still remember, as the ensemble completed their last note, the man seated to my left leapt up with an exclamation of "Bravo!" So pure it felt like it came from within the innermost part of his spirit that connected with divine energy and creative unity. It was so pure I can still hear and picture it to this day, 9.5 years later. Bengali poet, writer, playwright, composer, philosopher, social reformer, and painter Rabindranath Tagore speaks of such experiences of emotion and devotion in his collection of essays, Creative Unity. Born in 1861 and deceased in 1941, both in Kolkata, Tagore belonged to an esteemed family of creatives, considered some of the key influences of the Bengali Renaissance. Witnessing the rise and fall of British imperialism and colonial rule over India during his lifetime, Tagore's work discusses the encountering of East and West, the flood of Western ideologies throughout India and Asia as a whole, and the subsequent suppression of a possible fluidity of spiritual and worldly endeavors within one culture, society, or person. While a full recounting of his oeuvre is impossible, some of his notable works are Gitanjali, for which he was the first Asian to win the Nobel Prize for Literature, Gora and The Home and the World, novels on the social life and internal psychological conflict resulting from living in colonial India, and finally, and most ironically I thought, given his philosophies, the composition Paroto Pagyo Bidata, which was translated to Jana Gana Mana and announced as the national anthem of India to the General Assembly of the United Nations held at New York in 1947, just 6 years after his death. In a sense, capturing Tagore through any singular genre or category is not possible. In this way, he demonstrated through his own life the embodiment of creative unity, in that, as he said, the different systems of music and different schools of art, which lie scattered in different strata of society, and also those belonging to the other great countries of Asia, have to be brought together and studied. Tagore, in his body of work, brought such possibilities to light. Now the text. Tagore's Creative Unity is comprised of 10 essays which span the topics of folk traditions of learning, power dynamics in the home, the spirit of freedom, and the qualms of nationalism. While I wish we could simply sit here and read the entire book together, as there's no way I can sum up his writings in an eloquent of a manner, I will try to indicate a few key themes here that felt most potent. Tagore's main thesis is simple and complex at the same time, not unlike Guru Nanak Dev Ji's proclamation of Ik Onkar. Its simplicity is in the notion that, were we to live untouched without any corruption from social orders, we would find it true. Its complexity is that we are required to live in the world to embody it. As Tagore himself puts it, for us, the highest purpose of this world is not merely living in it, knowing it, and making use of it, but realizing our own selves in it through expansion of sympathy, not alienating ourselves from it and dominating it, but comprehending and uniting it with ourselves in perfect union. Tagore posits that through globalization and modernity, we have come to accept separation as natural and power as the ultimate manifestation of life on Earth. Post-colonial scholars like Frantz Fanon discuss the psychological impact of colonial rule on the human psyche, in which the experience of brutal power forces the colonized subject to accept domination as the only form of real, true power. Tagore offers similar analyses, but instead offers that the true harm is the inability to realize divine power within ourselves, for we only seek it in material and human form. Rather than rejecting modernity and civilization, Tagore instead complicates ideas of how humanity can coexist and the purpose for social life. Through discussions of many modern institutions, the home, the university, religion, he explains how social life is actually a conduit through which the divine can be realized, through a form he calls creative unity. Here, Tagore argues that by engaging with the creative elements of life, it is possible to understand divinity through social and material life. Quote, "Our society exists to remind us, through its various voices, that the ultimate truth in man is not his intellect or his possessions. It is in his illumination of mind, in his extension of sympathy across all barriers of caste and color, in his recognition of the world not merely as a storehouse of power, but as a habitation of man's spirit, with its eternal music of beauty and its inner light of the divine presence. In this effort, Tagore is able to embrace the advances of science, modernity, the machine. While he critiques them equally, he does not deny their utility. Instead, he asks us to question our tendency to offer the machine's superiority within the realm of all creation. Tagore advances his thesis by explaining how separation, cultivated through human conquest, has been the main enemy of creative unity. Tagore critiques, quote, our attempts to establish relations with the universe either by conquest or by union, either through the cultivation of power or through that of sympathy, end quote. The desire to possess, to cultivate one's sense of self and individuality above collective unity, is one of the greatest suppressions offered through Western thought. Instead, Tagore pushes for a unity of Western thought, which has gifted science, or the advancement of creation, and Eastern thought, which relies on the hopes of divine realization. He compares their unity to the necessity for a bird to land in its nest once in a while. Without the grounding of the West and without the flight of the East, the bird's flight is incomplete. The real flaw comes simply in the focus on production and capital accumulation over creation. Tagore offers countless examples. From apartheid South Africa to modernized Japan, he demonstrates the ways in which man has created separation, structure, and power as the natural order. Jamaican writer and philosopher Sylvia Wynter expounds upon such concepts in her work, particularly her well-read essay, Unsettling the Coloniality of Being, Power, Truth, Freedom, towards the human after man, its overrepresentation. In the essay, Wynter argues that capital M man has been overrepresented through the West's pursuit of, first, a religious mode of superiority through Christianity, and then, after Enlightenment, through one of secular logic or reason, or the nation. Here, the Western man is the ultimate representation of humanness, which is the most powerful form of creation. Tagore demonstrates how Eastern thought can challenge such ideas of human supremacy or Western man supremacy. Quote, India holds sacred and counts as places of pilgrimage all spots which display a special beauty or splendor of nature. These had no original attraction on account of any special fitness for cultivation or settlement. Here, man is free, not to look upon nature as a source of supply of his necessities, but realize his soul beyond himself. To challenge such ideas of cultivation or settlement, or ownership or domination as the ideal, Tagore pushes us to let go of greed, through which the possibilities of profit have suddenly become immoderate. The gravitational pull of a giant planet of greed with concentric rings of innumerable satellites, causing in our society a marked deviation from the moral orbit. Further so, he argues that ideologies of difference, like nationalism, are to blame for our single-mindedness around relationship to each other in the world. Quote, when a whole body of men train themselves for a particular narrow purpose, it becomes a common interest with them to keep up that purpose and preach absolute loyalty to it. Nationalism is the training of a whole people for a narrow ideal, end quote. Then one might ask, how do we free ourselves from such ideologies of separation that Tagore critiqued nearly a century prior, and which seem to have a stronger chokehold on us now than ever? I will return to Tagore for some answers. On freedom, he offers, when freedom is not an inner idea which imparts strength to our activities and breath to our creations, when it is merely a thing of external circumstance, it is like an open space to one who is blindfolded. Here, he reminds me of Brazilian philosopher Paulo Freire, who makes clear that the tangible desire for freedom is what will guide such an experience for us all. In Pedagogy of the Oppressed, Freire said, this, then, is the great humanistic and historical task of the oppressed, to liberate themselves and their oppressors as well. The oppressors who oppress, exploit, and rape by virtue of their power cannot find as power the strength to liberate either the oppressed or themselves. Only power that springs from the weakness of the oppressed will be sufficiently strong to free both. Tagore states the same notion in the reverse. Tagore says, "My experience in the West, where I've realized the immense power of money and organized propaganda, working everywhere behind screens of camouflage, creating an atmosphere of distrust, timidity, and antipathy, has impressed me deeply with the truth that real freedom is of the mind and spirit. It can never come to us from outside. He only has freedom who ideally loves freedom himself and is glad to extend it to others. He who cares to have slaves must chain himself to them. He who builds walls to create exclusion for others builds walls around his own freedom. He who distrusts freedom in others loses his moral right to it. Sooner or later, he is lured into the meshes of physical and moral servility." In a sense, what Tagore, Freire, Winter, all of these scholars are saying is the person who is committed to domination of others is also committed to the inhumanity of themselves. Finally, Tagore's consistent solution is one that we find in the centers of most forms of dharam. Tagore offers an analysis from Buddha's life. He says, "Buddha's path was the path of sacrifice, the utmost sacrifice of love. The meaning of such sacrifice is to reach some ultimate truth, some positive ideal, which in its greatness can accept suffering and transmute it into the profound peace of self-renunciation." I think Guru Nanak Dev Ji offers the same idea through the perspective of Gurmat in the first body of Japji Sahib. "Give satyara hoiye, give kooda tutte pal, hukm rajai chalna, Nanak likhya naal." The realm of truth is that within which creative unity is manifested and into which we absorb ourselves. Once we have reached that state of creative unity, we are not able to see any sort of separation. I will close with a final quote from the text in which Tagore lays out the seeming challenge of our 21st century of integration. "Therefore, I do not put my faith in any new institution, but in the individuals all over the world who think clearly, feel nobly, and act rightly, thus becoming the channels of moral truth. Our moral ideals do not work with chisels and hammers. Like trees, they spread their roots in the soil and their branches in the sky, without consulting any architect for their plans." I think the difference from a Gurmukh perspective is that we understand Vaheguru as the true architect, and like Guru Sahib said, we attempt to live within Hukam to establish this creative unity. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
Harleen's well-rounded research of not only Tagore's baseline work of creative unity, but also her exploring from a colonial lens and bringing in Faray's and Winter's perspective, and then at the end invoking Guru Nanak's hymns from Japji Sahib, indeed lays ahead of us a wide turf on which creative unity can be perceived. The various dimensions of creative unity that are suggested through these elements, she lays them all on a very wide turf for us to experience and come to terms with. She looks at creative unity as a way to inspire us all to realize ourselves in the perfect union with the ecosystem where we live, and where we realize that creative unity by seeking the divine powers in ourselves, such that we are making a conscious effort to unite the divine with the self. She inspires us to call upon the West to seek the flight of the East, to realize its totality, and inspires the flight of the East to seek the anchorage of the grounding of the West, to realize its creative unity. Her talk inspires us to prick the polished humanness of the West, to engage with the sacredness of the East, and beckons the sacredness of the East to engage with polished humanness of the West. Through the myriad of examples that Harleen's offered in the talk, it's a very strong call to all of us to seek and experience creative unity in and around us for all times. I thank Harleen for such a well-researched and a well-experience-laden talk that she's presented to us today. With that, I'd like to move on to our second speaker of today. That is Jaswin Sidhu. Jaswin has a very keen interest in literature, and she's really happy to regain the opportunities to engage back with literature through the tutelage, I might say so, of the Sikh Women Book Club initiative that's been going on. Her talk today is going to be on Fritjof Kepra's Tao of Physics. As we know, that Fritjof Kepra was an Austrian-born American systems theorist, a physicist, a deep ecologist, I might say a really creatively united person, Harleen. And he's very well known for popularizing the systems theory for his vast knowledge on eco-literacy. And he was influenced by the likes of Beethoven, David Bohm, and Gregory Bateson, several parties where he actually saw the universe as a creative, I might say that again, in creative unison with each other. And we'll let Jaswin take the stage on and tell us about what she's learned from this book. But again, let's sit tight and hear Jaswin's talk on Fritjof Kepra's Tao of Physics.
Sri Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Sri Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Sab to pehla, thank you Harjot, thank you Harleen for presenting such a great ideas. When I was listening to Harleen's talk, it felt like she was reading my book. This is how interconnected these books are. I just want to say thank you to the Nath Pragas USA and the Gurdwara Mata Triptakar's management for letting us do this. This is a very enriching experience for me, and I'm sure everybody else involved in here also. So let's get with the talk. The book I read this time was The Tao of Physics. What can I say? It's an awesome book. A little hard to read, but it's a great book. The Tao of Physics is an exploration of the parallels between modern physics and the Eastern mysticism. It's written in 1975 by physicist Fritjof Capra. It's the bestseller in the United States. It has been translated into 23 different languages. Capra summarized his motivation for writing this book in few lines. He said, science does not need mysticism, and mysticism does not need science, but man needs both. Man needs both mysticism and the science. As Harjot explained, Dr. Capra is a scientist. He's a physicist, educator, activist, and an author of many, many international bestsellers. His books connect conceptual changes in science with broader changes in worldview and values in the society. As in this book, Tao of Physics, the name Tao is not a name of a thing. It's not a name for a thing, but the underlying natural order of the universe, whose ultimate essence is difficult to circumscribe because it's non-conceptual, yet evident is one of being aliveness. In most belief systems, the word is used symbolically in its sense of like the way of living as the right or proper way of existence. or in the context of ongoing practices of attainment or of the full coming into being, as in the state of enlightenment or spiritual perfection, that is the outcome of such practices. And that reminds me of the last book I read, that was The Conference of Birds. That's the exactly spiritual enlightenment the bird has at end of the book. The Tao of Physics, or the author, questions many biases about the Western science and the Eastern spirituality, showing the close connections between the principle of physics and those of religion like Buddhism, Hinduism, and Taoism. I did not put it in this talk, but there's a great paper out there by, I think, Hardev Singh Birk, that was written in 2015, how Guru Granth Sahib and Tao of physics interconnect all the ideas that are presented. So if anybody has interest, they can go read that paper. It's an amazing paper to read on. The PDF is online. So people think of science and spirituality as being opposite. Western science is the realm of being rationality, whose language is mathematics and science. It expresses itself through numbers and formulas deduced from rigorous experimentation. On the other hand, Eastern religions discourage rationality. They say we should find knowledge by intuition, through which we might learn to perceive immeasurable truths, that truths we can't even comprehend. Scientists learn from observing the outside world. Buddhist practitioners need introspection to learn about the world, yet somehow both end up with similar visions of the world. How is that possible? So this book tries to attempt to answer these questions in so many different ways. What I got from this book personally is like what I'm feeling or what I learned from this book. It's not an easy book to read, but it's an absolutely enriching book. So there's 4 things I learned from this book. Number 1, spiritual experiences can be a new beginnings. So has it ever happened to any of you that you had a deeply profound and engaging spiritual experience that somehow had changed like direction of your all life? It needs not to be a large change, but it had a strong influence as who you are as a person and what you end up creating in the world and in your own life. I feel like these experiences, these very personal, profound experiences, are difficult to put in words. Sometimes it completely shifts the directions of who we are and what kind of life we are living so far, and the life changes from that point to the next point going after that. We have heard stories, watched movies, read literature about different people, or we have witnessed in our own life how different people, something happens in their life once, and the totally path of their life changes after that. People can't explain it, that that person was never like that. Actually, in my personal experience, I could tell you, my husband, he has always, as long as I've known him, as he has avid meat eater. All his life, like when I was growing up, I met him in college. As he growing up, it was McDonald's, steaks, and all kind of stuff. He was an avid meat eater. Somehow 6 and 7 years ago, all of a sudden, he said, that's it, I'm done eating meat. I'm just gonna go plant-based. And he just went whole plant-based like in overnight. It was a difficult thing for us to comprehend and to do actually, but it just, I can't explain how it happened, why it happened, but it just happened. He said, that's it, I'm just not gonna eat meat. He used to make perfect burgers, and everybody used to love his burgers. Summertime, people were very disappointed once he went to plant-based, but that was it. One night, something happened, and he just changed the way he lives his life. So for us, it was a totally, totally different, profound experience. Sometimes it completely shifts the directions or who we are and what kind of life we're living. So in another experience in my whole life that changed me in a way, I will talk about my experience when I was 7 years old. 6 or 7 years old, and I don't think I ever talked about this to anybody. My dad, he is a very, very spiritual person, as long as I have known him. So what I hear the stories about from others in my family, that he was never like that some point in his life, and something happened, or overnight he became very spiritual. So the way I know my dad is, he can sit hours and hours and do nitnem, and his eyes are closed. He has no idea what's happening around him. You could play music, you could dance. He could just sit there, close his eyes and go into samadhi. So for me, that's how I know my dad. This is not anything different from me. But people around him tell me a very different story. So when I was 6 and 7 years old, my parents lived in India that time. We had Guru Granth Sahib's bead at home. So every morning, my parents will wake up at early morning. I don't know, I think there was like 3, 4 a.m. in India. And they will wake me up. I hated it. I just totally hated it. Getting up, it's early in the morning. My dad got me into the habit of not taking morning shower as soon as I get up in the hot water. It would be water like, it would be lukewarm water, but not heated. It comes from the motor. I don't know how you call it. I think it was, we had a motor at home and we turn it on and the water will come. So I had to take shower in that water, and every morning I just hated it. And he would tell me after I take shower, he will tell me to come in the Babaji's room where we had the Guru Granth Sahib bead. He will be doing part, and he will teach me how to do part and samadhi. And being so young, only thing I knew how to do Japji Sahib's part. So he will teach me how to do Japji Sahib's part, how to cross my legs, where to put my hands, and how to concentrate in my mind, that my mind is going to keep going out of it, that not going to be concentrated on the path or the guru. It's going to keep going, jumping onto other things. It's a monkey mind, and it's going to keep telling me, concentrate, keep bringing it back. It's going to go out, bring it back. It's going to go out, bring it back. That experience, I could never talked about it, but it had a profound effect on my life. Soon after that, my dad had to go to Malaysia and other countries, so I did not continue those experiences, and I totally forgot about it as I grew up. But as I got older, those out-of-body experiences for me, in a minor way as being a kid, that how to concentrate on my mind on one thing had a profound impact the way I live rest of my life. I can't tell it to anybody, I can't explain it to anybody. I never even talked about this to my dad. But that was the experience. If he wouldn't have told me to go sit there, to me, 6, 7-year-old kid, I would have never experienced those things. So these out-of-body experiences that I kind of, I didn't think those was out-of-body experiences as a kid or even growing up as a person, but when I think back of it, I don't think that's normal experiences to go through. Imagine when these experiences happen on deep level. I'm sure that a lot of people around us go through these experiences and feel things that we don't feel in a normal day of life. The reason I'm speaking about it is that this book started with such one experiences. 6 or 7 years ago, before the author wrote this book, he said that he was sitting on a beach. He suddenly became aware of his whole environment being engaged in gigantic cosmic dance. He could sense the rhythms of energy in rocks, air, leaves, cosmic rays around him. He was able to feel the rhythm of everything around him suddenly. Suddenly, he was filled with joy, and it was such an experience in his life that prompted him to write this book. I feel like these experiences we have can really somehow guide us in doing things that earlier we could have never even imagined to do. Just like my husband, that I could have never imagined that he will ever go total plant-based in his life, the person who ate meat all his life. But these experiences come in people's life. But one word of caution is, don't chase the experiences in life. Chase knowledge. Experience will come on its own. Once you have the knowledge through different books and through people who have the knowledge around scholars, on the people who know a lot more than life than you do, the experience will come naturally, but we need to chase the knowledge, reading these books. The experience will take its own. So the author shares in the book is two different point of view. The number one thing that he shares, that the two different point of view can meet and create one great development. So it's probably true quite generally that in the history of human thinking, the most fruitful developments frequently take place at those points where two different lines of connect together, or two different lines of thoughts meet. I feel it's true as the most impactful developments, the most impactful changes in the world does not come from when one person advances ahead based on his or her own thinking and his or her own experience. It usually comes from when there is a meeting and a dialogue between two very different opposite thoughts, maybe opposing thoughts, maybe conflicting thoughts. First rate of intelligence lies holding two conflicting ideas at the same time and kind of make it work them together and come to a new point of reference. When opposite ideas come together, try to understand and try to find a common point. That's when most of the greatest changes in human history happened so far, and that's how these things will happen. The second point that I got from this book, that the harmony of yin and yang, which I took away from this book, is the idea author shares about the yin and yang. Of course, we all understand how idea of yin and yang represent balance, not just masculine and feminine balance, but also light and dark, good and bad, maybe to polar extremes. He writes, the yang, having reached its climax, retreats in favor of yin. So listen to this again. The yang, having reached its climax, retreats in favor of yin. So what the author is trying to say here is that we favor so many centuries of favoring the yang. That's the masculine energy. We can say that stands for self-assertion, stands for analysis, stands for rational knowledge, stands for science over religion, stands for competition over cooperation, expansion over conservation, anything like that. But for so many years, we have favored the yang side of life. But what will eventually happen in the world, when yang will reach its climax, then automatically nature will have it run its own course, and yang will also retreat in favor of the yin. What we're seeing in the world, even in these days, there is so much focus on conserving the environment, nurturing the environment. we're going back to alternative therapies. We're starting to focus not just material benefits, but the spiritual practices and the connectedness in a way. Yang, which reached its climax, retreating in favor of yin. Another thing that I don't know how many of you, I'm sure most of you guys listen to the podcast. There is a really good podcast by Stanford scientist. I think his name is Haberman, Dr. Haberman. There is a very well-respected, all his podcast is very scientific based, but most of his podcasts connect to the Eastern philosophies things. He talks about everything, but I'm just gonna concentrate, even in the Western medicine, they never kind of connected the gut microbiome or the gut bacteria the way I remember when I was a kid. My Nanaji was a doctor. I remember him getting our stool tested for parasites, for different things. But here, they never believed in the gut microbiome, but now for last some time, they have been starting to believe it. You can't open a scientific research paper or a book that does not talk about the gut microbiome, that how we have a different species living in the gut. But in a few years before that was kind of like a taboo topic, and they thought people who believe in that kind of hippies. What I took back from this book, that life will always be in harmony when there is the balance of yin and yang, which reminds us that life is a balancing act and most fulfilling when we learn to embrace its dualities, ups and downs, good times and bad times, joy and challenges, days and nights. Even when we go in our own ways and lose this balance, there's always a time when an autocorrect will happen. In my life, the way my husband's autocorrect happened. Even when we're not doing it consciously, life itself brings yin and yang. Life will take its own course one way. Sorry. One day we will be forced to harmonize our own yin and yang. So the number 3 topic I took from this book, the original and common purpose of physics and spirituality. The point that stayed with me is the very first thoughts of science and origin as we know of today are the same as of the spirituality or the religion. Maybe in the 6th century in Greek philosophy, when the physics came as we know it today, ideas were not to come up with a theory of relativity or understand the law of Newtonian physics. The idea was to understand nature of things around us, or the things that we can't even see. Physics came from Greek word physis, which means therefore, true nature of things. Greek philosophers or Greek physicists were really into mysticism. Even when you think about religion, idea did not really start with the concept of God or the one beyond everything else. Original idea was to understand the nature of everything. In a religion and mysticism, we understand that everything has divine power, but these 2 points became polar opposite, science and a religion. But the origins of these 2 points were still the same. They took a totally divergent pathway. One went this way, one went the other way. Both wanted to understand primary nature of things in life. So the world as we see it, the quantum theory thus reveals the basic oneness of the universe. What author is trying to say that the atomic physics, as we understood that time, that everything in the universe is interconnected. and there's no difference between the observer and what is being observed. It could have so many meanings in our own life. The way we perceive the things, the way we perceive life, the way we perceive the things in life makes it what it is. I am sure most of you guys have seen it, that I think a picture is shared in the social media. There's two people standing on the two different sides. One sees as 6 and one sees as at 9. They see the same thing, but they're just depending where are they standing from or where they're standing, what side of they're standing, they see two different things. The same thing could be said about religion and mysticism. When we experience things in a different way, let's extrapolate in our own life. Same situations as can be perceived very differently by two different people. Same things can be challenged to one person and an opportunity and total joy to another. World on its own is not good or bad. Depends how we perceive it. The way we perceive it, it gives it identity of being good or bad world. The world is just world. There is no meaning attached to it. We attach the meaning to it the way we see the situations being good situations or bad situations. So the same thing between religion and mysticism, they both see it two different ways, but they're still interconnected. On the same point, like as I change my attitude to things, the world will change. The world will change for me. The world I live in, it will change for me because I choose to look at it in a different way. Not the way I was looking at it before. If I look at it a different way, the world will change for me. It kind of sounds super theoretical and totally disconnected from reality. But that's what exactly quantum theory and atomic physics is telling you, that it's kind of disconnected from reality. We cannot comprehend it what it is. To sum it up, it's a wonderful read and motivates me to know more about quantum physics, which I don't know much because I'm a biology and biochemistry major. So quantum physics is something I guess that I will take a look from now on. I did not connect this book with the Sikh teachings and the way it, but there, like on, if somebody wants to read it, there is a really good articles and really good discussions online that this connects this book totally to the Sikh way of life. That's all for me. Thank you for listening to it, and thank you everybody for giving me a chance to present what I learned from this book.
So the way that Jaswin talked about Tao of physics took me on a bit of an internal experiencing journey. And the way I saw this happen was that one of the ways one can potentially perceive this book is as the ode of a creative person, wherein the ode forms itself because he is a true lover of science and true lover of physics. And as she was saying, Jasmine, that the physics really means the intent to explore the true nature of things. So the way it occurred to me was that Fritjof, by virtue of being a pure physicist, perceived the world through the lens of physics subconsciously. And that was a part of his being, that was a part of his viewing and experiencing the world. So when he sat on that one fine evening on the side of the ocean, all that physics was to him and all that he was to physics, it came out in that experiencing process where he thought that the universe is actually presenting a unified cosmic dance, which he equates to the movements of Shiva in the way that Shiva dances by virtue of his movements in the Natraj position. So to see this harmony is one of a kind of experience which I believe dawns on us when we are truly pursuing the true nature of things from our own unique lens. When we're pursuing knowledge for the sake of knowledge, because knowledge is what we truly want to seek, that is when the subatomicity of our unique experiences will form around the nucleus of the knowledge. If we are not seeking knowledge in the way of true seeking, our experiencing shall be shallow. It shall not truly represent us. It shall therefore not even truly make us. So one of the calls of this profound work is to incite a yearning for true knowledge, understanding and experiencing the universe through a lens which we are really vested in, which really defines us. So once we've defined our unique lens that only we possess, I think our act of seeking knowledge becomes secondhand, almost, subconsciously we seek it out, and subconsciously we construct our experiences. There were several examples that Jasmine provided from her life, in the way that life for her husband changed and how her dad became spiritual. And so when we have this true seeking for knowledge, our experiencing is bound to follow. There is no way that our experiencing will not follow as if we're proceeding truly for in the pursuit of knowledge. So thank you for inspiring us in a very unique way, Jasmine, today, to pick this book. It's a hard book, but nothing meaningful really comes without engaging with something that's hard. If we really need to grow ourselves, we have to engage with something that is not ourselves at a given point. That is something that's beyond us at any given point. So in that seeking of that hardship is how we really grow. So I'm personally very motivated to pick this book up, and I implore you all to consider that. Thank you, Jasmine. As the third and the final leg of today's meet, let's get some comments and some awareness about Confucius's Analects, and this is one of the many renditions of the Analects that's available in the market. There is tons of Western interpretations on this seminal work. There are tons of Oriental interpretations of this work. So this is one of the works here that was actually composed by a Taiwanese, Chinese background sinologist. She served at Yale for several years, and but this is not the only one. So I'll start with giving an account of the versions and components of Confucius's Analects. Confucius was a Chinese philosopher who lived from 551 to 479 before Christ. There are 5 classics that are considered to be the basic texts of Confucianism, and Analects is the most important one. Analects are the dialogues between this great Chinese philosopher and his disciples. And it's believed that these were collected by the disciples of Confucius and not by the sage himself. The chapters are grouped by themes of the Analects, but candidly, they do not necessarily have a very structured discussion to them. You would see that several of the themes are being repeated in the subsequent books of the Analects. The Analects is about 500 independent passages, and like I said, it's divided into 20 books. And a later version of the Analects was found around 1973, and those versions were written on bamboo strips. It's believed that those writings were actually done before 550 BC. I'm sorry. And although this version is fragmentary, yet it helps to shed new light on the textual tradition of critical dialogues. And some of the books in the Analects have originated from what was found from these strips. Now, there are different themes that are bundled in the Analects. Traditionally, it's been widely noted that the books 1 to 10 bear some similar features of length, structure, and vocabulary, and it has become common to speak of these books as the upper text. The books 11 to 20th are generally recognized as the lower text. Now, the philosophy that's conveyed through the Analects is basically an ethical perspective. And the text has always been understood as structured on a group of key ethical terms. There are several terms that comprise the ethical philosophy that Confucius propagates and promulgates. Some of them are Ren, which is really translated as humaneness or generosity, which is really to have the comprehensive ethical virtue of benevolence, humanness, goodness. Then there is another ethical philosophy of the Zhanzi, which is often used to denote an ideally ethical and capable person, sometimes simply meaning a power holder. Then there is the ethical doctrine of the Li, or the ritual institutions of the Zhao, of which Confucius was the master, and the range of behavior subject to the broad category denoted by, really this term ranges from political protocol to court ceremony, from religious rite to village festivals, in about daily etiquettes to disciplines of personal conduct when alone. Then there is one of the very popular ethical components of this Analect called the filiality or jiao. And that's a traditional cultural imperative to the way Confucius thinks. He thinks that obedience to parents raised to a subtle level of fundamental self-discipline and character building is the necessity for every individual. And he thinks that should be a primary component of everyone's ethos. And there are other ethical components of the Wen, of the Yi, of the Zong, of the Jin, and Yang, etc. Again, Analects is really the ethical moral philosophy that Confucius established and talked about, and his disciples talked about. So you would see a whole framework, a whole body of knowledge around the Oriental ethics in this book. I'd like to now take this opportunity from the 20 books that comprise the Analects canon. I present here notes and quotes and gatherings from some of them. Of course, time doesn't permit to go through all 20, so I've taken some cherry picks here. The book 1 of the Analects addresses the questions of education and addresses the question of why is it important in becoming a man of complete virtue. So what is complete virtue in Analects? A man, according to Confucius, has complete virtue when he takes no discomposure even when other men take no note of him. To Confucius, a complete virtue also means that flowery words and an insinuating appearance are not true virtue. A man of complete virtue is not gluttonous, and he is in earnest with everything he does. He loves to learn and frequents the company of men of principle. And Confucius says, the man of greater mind, who, when he is eating, craves not to eat to the full, who has a home, but craves not for comforts in it, who is active and earnest in his work and careful in his words, who makes towards men of high principle, and in doing so maintains his own rectitude, that man may be styled a devoted student. In the book 4, Confucius concerns the virtuous manners which constitute a neighborhood. So, if you can see, Confucius is actually going from the self to the exterior world. So whereas the book 1 talks about the virtues of the self, the book 4 takes it further and talks about what are the virtuous manners that constitute a neighborhood. He says, virtue does not stand alone. It must have neighbors. For Confucius, the good life is not simply an isolated existence engaging in pure contemplation. He believes that true neighborhood virtuousness is the one that actually cultivates noble citizens for the purpose of a great empire. Then in Book 10, which is perhaps the most consequential section of the Analects, which is appropriately hidden in the middle of the text, Confucius himself is described. It is said that he dressed simple and was very sincere in his village, and he spoke cautiously in political situations. He spoke respectfully to his rulers. When he came away from an audience, he appeared relaxed. He ate very little, never drank wine or dried meat, and always had ginger with him while eating. The various ways he changed his countenance are also described in Book 10. In Book 16, amongst other things, he discusses friendships, and he continues at length listing 3 things of advantage to men and 3 things that are not advantageous. Confucius says there are 3 friendships which are advantageous and 3 which are injurious. Friendship with the upright, that is, with the folks that light up oneself with wisdom, friendship with the sincere, and friendship with the man of much observation, these are advantageous. However, friendship with the man of specious airs, friendship with the insinuatingly soft, and friendship with the glib-tongued, these are injurious. Book 18 is a list of royal families, their employees, musicians, and so on, and it contains very little of Confucius. But no doubt, it does provide modern scholars and anthropologists with a fruitful supply of information to examine the Chinese aristocracy through. And finally, the book 20, which is, of course, the final book, it points to us the several doctrines that are later expounded upon by Confucianism. The doctrine of the mean, the ordinances of heaven, and propriety. And the closing words of this text are very powerful in my mind, and the words go like this: without knowing the force of words, it is impossible to know men. And I repeat it again. The closing words of the text are, without knowing the force of words, it is impossible to know men. Meaning a man is all but his words. That's a very powerful statement. Next, I'd like to present a very brief commentary about certain popular translations which are very respected out there for this work. There is a translation called The Analects of Confucius, a philosophical translation by Roger Ames and Henry Rosemont. This is a philosophical translation, so those of us who are interested in eliciting the philosophical import of Analects are recommended a reading of this work. And then there is another one called D.C. Lowe's translation of the Analects by Penguin Classics. It's a straightforward translation with minimal notes by one of the most best-known modern scholars. Then there's another one which is a bit dated, but it's still excellent and influential, and that goes by Confucian analects the great learning and the doctrine of the mean. With that, I'd like to come towards the ending section of my talk here. At its heart, Analects enumerates a comprehensive ethical system which provides a moral premise on which relationship with the self and the outside should be practiced. To properly govern, one must cultivate oneself, and in cultivating oneself, one is actually contributing to the country's governance. The Analect argues that societies should be ruled by moral individuals rather than by laws or force. It illuminates the tenets of what Confucius believes are the 5 constant relationships. Those relationships being that between the sovereign and the subject, wherein the rulers should be benevolent and subjects should be loyal. The relationship between a father and a child, where the father must be loving and the child must be obedient. The husband and the wife, where the husbands are to be good and fair and wives have to be understanding. Between the elder brother and the younger brother, might be construed as the elder sibling and the younger sibling, where the elder sibling is to be gentle and the younger one has to be respectful. And finally, the friend-friend relationship, where older friends are to be considerate and the younger one to be reverential. Now, one of the top critiques of Analects is that it's often said that, while the focus on the need for self that's ethically aware, need for community that's ethically aware, and for government that's formed on the bedrock of ethos, while all this is admirable, such is not sufficient and feasible in this century. And this is due to the fact that the teachings limit human beings to performing good deeds and striving for perfection. And these teachings do not accept errors and do not allow for any human behavior or action that is less than righteous, calling into question the teaching's practicality for the society. Also, it may appear that the work is unwilling to embrace reform and advocate for innovation that is reflected in the way it upholds conventions. My personal views about this body of work in Analects is that there are junctures of life. We all experience those. There are junctures of our lives when our personal ethos seeks the visceral warmth of its own kin, meaning ethos wants to talk to ethos. We're not ready at that time for ethos to engage with logos or for ethos to engage with mysticism or for ethos to engage with any higher realm of consciousness. When those junctures arrive on us, the work of Analects offers it exactly that and speaks to it in ways that expands, nurtures, and enhances the experience, the self-experience of our ethos, such that it assumes its more evolved version. So in ethos, our personal ethos, talking to the ethos framework of the Analects, our own ethos gets a boost and gets elevated to its next reincarnation, if I may say so, which it probably would not have assumed had it not had the chance to talk to its own kith and kin. And the other aspect that I came to realize in reading the Analects is that it represents a journey on the ethical plane of human consciousness. And it exactly does that. It does not claim it's doing anything more. Yet in doing so, it leaves it free to explore its further pathways. By it, I mean the human consciousness. So the Analects leave the human consciousness free to explore its subsequent layers of manifestation by seeking experiences of its own choosing. This seeking of experiences is realizable by primarily applying one's free will while entreating in parallel all that comes at oneself as the trigger, one, to observe how one's free will interacts with the incoming influences, and second, evaluate if the import of the interaction is in line with the demands of the higher plane of consciousness. In other words, this work takes us to that epitome of ethical profoundness, I might say, or ethical bedrock, where perhaps the subsequent layers of the human consciousness start to beckon at you. Because you have maximized and you have exhausted the ethical framework, the ethical plane of human consciousness. So the higher levels of consciousness beckon at you with a elevated force. With that, I'd like to encourage you to consider giving this book a reading. One suggestion that I might have for the interested reader is to not treat this work as a textbook that you must read from page 1 to page N. Pick this up, look for themes of the different books of the Analects, and pick that book that at that juncture will satiate the thirst of your ethos. With that, we come to the end of this session of the Sikh Women Book Club. Again, on behalf of Nathragas USA and Mata Tripta Gurukar, I thank you all for being here with us, being a participant in our ongoing journey. We look forward to having you in the 9th session of the Sikh Women Book Club in 3 weeks from now. Thanks again for being with us. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.